Hey everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad you're joining us for this explainer today because we're going to do something pretty cool. We're essentially going to take a wrecking ball to long-form fiction, break it all down, and figure out its fundamental mechanics. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder what makes a story hold together? Like the steel beams in a skyscraper? Well, today we're diving into the absolute architecture of fiction. We'll start by looking at one perfectly balanced storytelling format. Then dig into the core structural elements, and finally check out the incredibly wild variety of genres those elements can actually build. All right, let's jump right in. So here's our blueprint for today. First, we'll define the novella. Then we'll map out the 6 core elements of fiction. And finally, we'll explore some different novel types. Starting off with Section 1, defining the novella, a truly focused narrative. So, the word novella actually comes from the Italian word novelle. And structurally speaking, it hits this incredibly precise sweet spot. It's shorter than a full-length novel, but definitely longer than a short story. And because of that very specific length, it's forced to have an intense focus. A novella typically zeroes right in on just one main incident, usually in a single location, and honestly, it really only follows 1 or 2 main characters. It's this tightly woven, incredibly well-structured narrative. There's just no room to wander off into a dozen different subplots. To really ground this, let's look at a few famous examples in English. You've probably read or at least heard of a few of these. We've got The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, Henry James's absolute classic, The Turn of the Screw, Billy Budd by Herman Melville, Thomas Mann's Death in Venice, Saul Bellows' Seize the Day, and of course, John Steinbeck's Pearl. When you think about these specific works, you can totally see that definition in action, right? They are deeply focused, highly concentrated stories that pack a massive punch, all without the sprawling, endless chapters of a standard novel. Moving on to Section 2, the 6 elements of fiction. These are our essential building blocks. Here's a quick look at the original source material we're using today to map out these crucial components. All of these factors are deeply, deeply interconnected in any author's work. Let's actually pull these out and break them down one by one to see how they tick. Taking a bird's eye view for a second, we have 6 vital elements: theme, plot, character, setting, conflict, and language or style. Honestly, you can think of this list as the connective tissue of literally any narrative. You simply cannot have a compelling story without these 6 things interacting with each other. So let's break down exactly what each one means, starting right at the foundation. All right, first up is theme. The theme is the central idea in the novel. It's basically the core philosophical statement or this profound truth that the writer desperately wants to share with you. But they don't just hand it to you like an essay, right? They communicate this truth through the actual narration of events and through the characters' actions within their setting. It is without a doubt the underlying soul of the entire narrative. Next up is plot, the actual course of events that brings that theme to life. But as we know, not all plots are built the same way. We can contrast a simple plot against a complex one. A simple plot is super straightforward. It consists of just one primary plot line, which, by the way, is exactly what we just saw in those highly focused novellas. On the flip side, a complex plot involves this intricate interweaving of tons of subplots. It creates a tangled, multi-layered architecture that you typically find in a massive, epic novel. Now, who's actually driving that plot forward? Well, the characters, of course. The protagonist is your main character, the person whose actions we, the readers, are following the whole way through. But to make a story actually interesting, you need opposition. Enter the antagonist. This can be another character, an entity, or even an internal or external force that is directly clashing with the protagonist. But remember, those characters don't just exist in a vacuum. The setting provides the stage for everything. It covers the place, the period, the time, the weather, and even the lifestyle of the background. And setting can absolutely affect the plot and characters directly. Then, playing out on that stage, you have the conflict. Conflict is that struggle between opposite forces. Maybe it's a battle inside the character's own mind, or maybe it's an external fight against something else. The conflict is the absolute engine of the story. It's exactly what sparks that curiosity and keeps us desperately turning those pages late into the night. The 6th and final element here is language and style. This is all about how the story is actually being told. An author might be incredibly wordy, throwing in massive vocabulary and lofty phrases. Or they might be super laconic, just cutting right to the chase. They might even mix both. But their specific linguistic choices create what we call the texture of the narration. It literally dictates the entire vibe of the book and how it impacts us as readers. All right, Section 3, Exploring Novel Types. Let's look at some different architectural styles. Okay, let's uncover some pretty cool aha moments by looking at the roots of some really complex-sounding genres. First, the picaresque novel. This follows the episodic adventures of an eccentric or, kind of disreputable protagonist. And it makes total sense because it comes from the Spanish word pícaro, meaning rogue. Next is the epistolary novel, where the whole story unfolds through letters or diary entries. This stems from the Latin word epistola, literally meaning letter. And finally, the Bildungsroman. This is basically a fictional biography focused on a character's growth from childhood into adulthood. And fittingly enough, it comes from the German word for growth. Building on those, let's look at 4 foundational genres. The realistic novel aims for, strict realism. It uses complex characters with mixed motives, usually rooted in a specific social class, and puts them through totally plausible everyday experiences. The historical novel is pretty straightforward. It's set in a period earlier than when it was written. Then you have the autobiographical novel, which is based on the author's actual life, usually told in the first person, although they might tweak names or a few details here and there. And the psychological novel, this one's fascinating. It treats the internal life and hidden, messy thoughts of the protagonist as being just as important as anything happening in the external plot. Now let's contrast 2 wildly different styles. First, the allegorical novel. An allegory carries more than one level of meaning. The surface story you're reading is entirely different from its deeper, symbolic meaning, which could be political, religious, or philosophical. It's very deeply layered. Now contrast that intellectual style with the atmospheric, creeping dread of a Gothic novel. Gothic fiction goes all in on terror, mystery, horror, the supernatural, and, those classic decaying haunted buildings. It just goes to show 2 completely different ways to use the exact same 6 elements of fiction we just talked about. Let's bring up our source text one last time here as we get ready to dive into our final set of highly specific, wildly imaginative genres that truly push the boundaries of what a story can do. Check out this incredible technique, stream of consciousness. The history here is actually super cool. The phrase was coined by William James all the way back in his 1890 treatise, Principles of Psychology. It refers to the literal, unfiltered flow of human thoughts. So when a novelist uses this style, they narrate incidents exactly as they pop into the character's mind, in the exact sequence they happen. It's completely designed to flawlessly mimic real chaotic human thought. And finally, let's differentiate between 2 awesome types of speculative fiction. Utopian or dystopian novels are basically massive societal thought experiments. A utopia explores an imaginary ideal society, while dystopias, obviously, explore the exact nightmare opposite. Contrast that with science fiction. Sci-fi explores futuristic settings and concepts, think space travel, time travel, alien life, and it often looks at the fallout of scientific innovations. In fact, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, written back in 1823, is widely considered to be the very first true novel in this genre. Pretty amazing, right? And that brings us to the end of our architectural tour of fiction. We've seen how novellas and novels are built completely from the ground up, relying on theme, plot, character, setting, conflict, and style. And we've seen how those exact same elements can be arranged into totally breathtaking, wildly different genres. But I want to leave you with one final provocative question to chew on today. Based on these 6 core elements and looking at the genres we just went over, what type of novel is your life story? Are you a realist drama, a coming-of-age Bildungsroman, or maybe a totally unpredictable picaresque adventure? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep on reading, and I'll catch you next time.